have some great information today to share with you.
We really do, some important things. And you know that almost everyone, Ken, has heard of programs that encourage teenagers to abstain from sex. But sexual purity is much more than just abstaining from sex. It's a heart issue. Yes. And our guest is here to share with us an alternative approach, which she calls planned purity. Welcome, Jennie Bishop. Thank you, Jennie.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Jennie.
We're glad that you're here with us today. Now, you have written a couple of books on purity, but before we get into that, tell us a little bit about who you have at home and who you're working on in the purity issue at home.
Oh, yes. I have two daughters, 12 and 15, Vashti and Christiana. Vashti's a ballet dancer, and Christiana is a pianist, and since they have a father who's a composer and musician, worship leader, we kind of have a crazy, just creative kind of family environment at our house.
Well, is having daughters maybe what sort of motivated you to pursue purity?
Absolutely. In fact, my 15-year-old, when she was in kindergarten, came home one day and said, "Mommy, all my girlfriends have boyfriends. I need to have a boyfriend too."
Wow.
And I wasn't prepared for that. I'd been very intentional about how I was teaching them when they were young. But in kindergarten, to have a child come home and ask that question really rocked my world. So that very night, I was on my knees asking for my daughters, "Lord, what can I do to teach them at this age, you know, what they need to be able to, you know, maneuver through relationships and to keep themselves pure?" And the answer to that was the story, The Princess and the Kiss. And that book since has sold over 200,000 copies all over the world. And I just thought I was writing it for my girls. So this is something that, you know, has happened is so beyond me, and it's been a real exciting thing to be a part of.
Well, the good thing about this, Jennie, is that this is a book that you could read to a very little girl as she's growing up. And just leafing through it real quickly here, it just you have the illustrations, and there is a kind of a princess story to it all.
Right, it's a very classic fairy tale approach, and what's beautiful about it is it's very non-threatening. We have a princess who is saving her kiss, which is portrayed as a ball of light, and she's looking for the right man because her parents have given her this gift as a gift from God. When she's a young woman, they actually say, "Now it's yours to keep or to give away as you see fit." And then men come, one is rich, one is handsome, one is romantic, but she doesn't find any of these men worthy of her kiss until she meets a man who has saved his kiss for her.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And so they marry and exchange the kisses, and when they have their first child, they present to her her first kiss. So it's a story of the legacy that we leave in purity and how purity affects us for a lifetime, which is really what PurityWorks has come to be all about.
I'm curious to know, Jennie, when your kindergartner came to you, what did you tell her about having a boyfriend at the age of 5?
Well, you know, at that age, it's a very simple explanation. You know, I was just saying to her, it's very important that you're friends with boys. And this is what I say to a lot of parents, is our kids need to be involved in friendships. So if you have a child who comes home and says, "I really like Billy," the way to deal with that is to say, what is it you like about Billy? Is he fun? Is he hardworking? How does he do in his schoolwork? Is he kind to children? But to point out those character qualities that are so important, not just in choosing a spouse someday, but in choosing friendships.
Friendships, yeah. And you can cross that over to girls too. I mean,
right,
absolutely. Girl, I mean, you can compare it to the same. Well, right now, that's what we tell our granddaughters. Right now, it's just good to have friends.
And it's so important because our kids are being pushed earlier and earlier into romantic relationships and playing at romantic relationships. And that just sets the scene for early experimentation that leads our kids into trouble. So it's very important that we encourage them to have friendships.
Yes. Well, you know, I can remember being a little girl, and it's a little bit different than it was way back when I was a little girl, but you played mommy and daddy. You know, you played house. You wanted to be a mom when you grew up. You wanted to have children. You wanted the boy that you were friends with to be the dad. And so, you know, we have to teach our children what's appropriate in play as well as what's appropriate in life later on. But to me, there's nothing wrong with having that as long as they have some kind of, you know, our last program that we just did, Ken, we did it about, we talked about wisdom and how important it is for us as parents to have wisdom in order to know how to teach our children some of these things. And would you say that some of those principles are in your book, The Princess and the Kiss?
Yes, I would say so. I would say so. And then we break more of that out when we do conference teaching, where we'll do a Planned Purity conference for parents and then approach them on all these issues of what what is appropriate in the vocabulary that we use, even
at
with our young ones.
Yes,
and at what age? How do we use that, and how does that shape our children and their ideas of what a relationship should look like?
So talk to us a little bit more about Planned Purity and some of these conferences that you're talking about.
Yes, Planned Purity is an approach where we're not focusing on teen abstinence. If you look at the figures, teen abstinence hasn't really done very well. Teen abstinence, in most circles, you have about an 88% of those people who make commitments who come away from that commitment, who don't follow through.
So that's a failed rate, 80%.
Right, that's a failure rate.
Yeah.
So what we have looked at is the fact that purity and pursuing purity is something that needs to take place throughout life. There are milestones throughout life that need to be approached and taught as a person is growing, and carried out even into marriage and into grandparenthood. You leave a legacy after you die. You affect a baby's life before it's born by what you believe about purity. So it's a lifetime continuum. That's the way we train.
I love you saying that, because one of the things that I've always prayed for my 2 girls is purity. Please, Lord, help my children to stay pure until they're married. And then I went, until they're married? That doesn't make sense. Because,
absolutely.
You know,
you hear a lot of teenagers saying that. I'm going to be pure until I'm married. But it's so crucial to understand practicing purity within a marriage, or a marriage, of course, will suffer. You know, there's so many issues with that nowadays with our media and the culture around us. We continually are reminding parents of how important it is to guard our children and to teach them to evaluate media and
culture.
So
give us some tangible things that maybe are taught at Planned Purity.
Sure. There's a diagram that we use when we're in conference, and it goes through the foundation, which is what purity is about.
It's up on the screen.
Yeah. You've got purity and the definition of what it is, because it's about so much more than sex. It's about the heart. Above all, guard the heart, because it's the wellspring of life. And then we go and build the house by talking about purity of heart, using the 5 doors, which are the 5 senses: what you see, what you hear, how you value breath and life, what you speak, and what you put your hands on.
Jenny, this is great.
Well, I love it because you can teach it to really small children
at their level.
And this is the foundation. Then you go into purity of body and some boundaries for that. The need for authenticity as parents and in communities, how to connect with other people with purity, a passion for purity, so that your kids are on a good path there. But what I love about that picture is the grace circle that's around it, because nobody's going to do this perfectly.
No.
We're all going to fail, but we can teach from our failures as well as our successes. So there's so many great aspects when you look at it from top to bottom and you put it all together and say, this is what purity really is. We don't have to be confused about it anymore. And there's a method to go from the bottom to the top.
And I even saw purity in your vocabulary. You know, what might be pure in our home might not be purity in your home. So there are some kind of things that maybe have to do with families and the way that you're teaching purity. Would you agree with that?
That's very important. Yes, absolutely. Because if you're making choices about what you're watching on TV, different families are going to make different choices. But the key is communication. What will you communicate to that child? And how will you help them evaluate whether or not that is truthful or that doesn't go along with our family's beliefs and values? So a lot of conversation has to take place, and it's not about everybody having the same rules. It's about us being intentional.
One of the things I saw there was dress, and that's one of the biggest keys, I think, today.
Oh my! When you got girls, oh boy.
High school, college, particularly, you know, it's just amazing.
Well, our society has failed in that regard, don't you think, Ken? I mean, we have messed up. What looks like it is normal, regular kind of dress now is not appropriate.
Right. That's so true.
So how do you approach that with your teenagers?
Well, we talk about the value of ourselves as people, and we talk about the power of beauty.
That's good.
The power of beauty is so great, and each young lady has the responsibility to decide if she will use her beauty to attract attention to herself, or she'll use her beauty to attract attention to God, to something greater than herself. You know, I always give my daughters the picture of, if somebody looked at you, would they say, oh, she is so gorgeous, or would they say, if that's what God's like, I want to have some of that.
Wow.